Good evening and welcome to Conversation with Edith. The following are some newspaper reports I recently read. A bomb threat forced the evacuation of approximately 2,000 worshippers from a Westchester synagogue. Swastikas and anti-Semitic slogans found on a Westchester synagogue and temple school. Attacks made in North London on minorities, including 3 rabbis, and Jewish children have also been attacked. The first time in 40 years, the Central Synagogue in Copenhagen was bombed the evening of the Jewish holidays. Sounds pretty bad, doesn't it? My guests this evening are Congressman Joseph DioGuardi, the U.S. representative of the 20th Congressional District. In addition to his participation on numerous political committees, he has had a close association with Jewish organizations as well as the Archdiocese of New York. He was recently praised by President Reagan on his human rights leadership. And to my immediate right is Rabbi Maurice Davis, who has been a spiritual leader of the Jewish Community Center of White Plains since 1967. Among the numerous awards he has received is the Catholic Interracial Council Award. He is the past president of the Westchester Board of Rabbis, and Rabbi Davis is a member of the President's Council of the College of White Plains. I'm delighted that you're both here.
Nice to be with you, Edith.
Thank you. What is happening to the world? What is happening to our country? I'm very concerned.
That's a small question. What is
Where do
happening
we
to
start?
the world?
Well, when I see these things going on in London and Copenhagen, all over, and the United States, the thing that got me particularly interested or got me a little revved up about this was on another program, a national program, where I heard that in the heartland of our country, farmers are in Iowa, more than that, all over, where they're having arsenals and munitions where they want to kill Jews of prominence, etc., etc., due to, quote unquote, allegedly Jewish bankers.
I think you have to take a look at this situation of anti-Semitism, and in order to get a handle on it, you have to break it down a little bit. You mentioned 2 different kinds of anti-Semitism.
All right.
Very briefly, and unless we understand the difference, we're going to confuse the issue. There is a religious, with the quotation marks, religious anti-Semitism that's been going on for a couple of thousand years, in which Jews were persecuted because they would not accept Christianity. Now, that is something that the church has fought against, especially in the last 10 to 20 years, even longer, I guess, starting with Pope John the 23rd, and they've done remarkable things in changing the atmosphere from that. That was religious anti-Semitism. If you convert, you're a good guy. If you don't, you're a devil. Then there's the anti-Semitism that began in the 19th century of the race theorists. You're born into an inferior race or an evil race, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't convert out of that. Your crime is being born, and the only answer to that is to be killed. That race theory ended with Hitler. It started with the Dreyfus Affair, perhaps, and reached its culmination in the Holocaust. Well, these are 2 different kinds. When you see today Arab-sponsored attacks upon Jews, that has nothing to do with religion. There's nothing to do with accepting or not accepting the Messiah. That's because they were born Jews. And the stuff you hear in Iowa is a mixture. They're saying Jews as a race are money lenders or whatever evil term they want to use. You have to make this distinction. The church has fought against the first one. All mankind has to fight against the second. There's a different thing entirely.
No question.
And you, of course, were helpful in fighting the Zionism is racism resolution that was passed 10 years ago, and that is obviously a racist, secular attack.
I had some strong feelings on that, as you know, Rabbi. I think the UN took a real downturn when it allowed that resolution to pass. And one of the things that I put my efforts behind early, Edith, was to get the president to sign on the resolution condemning that UN resolution. And I was the House sponsor, and Al D'Amato was the Senate sponsor. And it caused me to receive a pen early from the president because it passed as a law just about a month ago, and I'm delighted to be the House sponsor on that. Just in general terms, there is really no place in our society for bigotry. I guess human nature being what it is, you will always find some people that are bigots. But I think that we've got to understand that the very basic core of our great society is its pluralism, is its tolerance of different points of views. And if we allow any radical element, any fringe, no matter how small, to get away with any of these manifestations that you just mentioned, then we start the beginning of the end of this great society. So we've got to be very careful that we take strong action against those who would seek to deprive others of their views and many other things. People today, human nature being what it is, are always looking for scapegoats. There are many problems in the world. And we've got to be careful that they do not transgress the line of propriety, certainly the lines that I believe are essential for the preservation of this great society.
I just want to interject one thing.
Sure, Edith.
Reverend Sexton, Father Joseph Sexton, was supposed to be here. He called me about 2 hours before. He just could not make it.
Well, Joe Sexton is a good example of the activities of the Catholic Church in combating anti-Semitism. Now, you painted a very bleak picture, Edith.
It's bleak to me.
And it's a frightening thing. I think anti-Semitism is an obscenity, and it's got to be fought no matter where it appears. But I think we have to find out more about the individual cases. Is this a worldwide sudden thing? Is it, you see, the Arab nations or the PLO will say, we're not opposed to Jews. We're not anti-Semitic. We're only opposed to Israel. So they'll bomb worshippers in a synagogue in Paris or people eating at a delicatessen. And what's that got to do with Israel? You can see that it's really against Jews as a class of people. But it is not the religious anti-Semitism of the Middle Ages.
I can't believe that you feel that we should not be worried. Just in New Jersey, this past year, there were 15 in Bergen County, a very small community, where there were 15 acts of anti-Semitics.
Edith, no one says you should not be worried. No one says that. Listen, what I'm saying is, let's put it in its perspective. This is an evil that must be fought. Like terrorism is an evil that must be fought. But we have to find out who is behind what. For centuries, there was one group behind it. Now there's another group. Right now it's Israel and the Middle East, which is the cause of a great deal of this hatred being manifest. You see, if Arabs now lean on ancient anti-Semitism of other people and say, I'll now use it for my own goal, which is to knock off Israel, and call it for what it is.
I agree, Edith, that we can't generalize about these things, but certainly we shouldn't let our guard down. We have to constantly look for the manifestations of bigotry and lack of tolerance. And I think some of the most horrible examples that we read are the attacks on synagogues where they take the Holy Scrolls out and desecrate them. It's like, you know, the same feeling that you have when someone mugs an 80-year-old woman. How could this happen? How could there be people to even think about doing something like that?
But somebody is doing it.
No question, and we've got to...
Somebody's been doing it for 2,000 years.
I know,
let's not kid ourselves.
But let's not attribute
now,
that to society in general. We
Right.
must find out who the perpetrators are and deal with them very effectively.
Yeah.
You know what the biggest danger is, Edith?
What is it?
The biggest danger is that when something like this happens, that someone tries to talk it away by saying, well, you got to understand the motive of these people because they've lost their land or they lost this land. The first airplane hijacking was in 1968 against an El Al plane, and everyone said, well, you got to understand the national desires of the Palestinians. So therefore, you had 100 more.
You have to understand that, sure.
The Achille Lauro is the first of cruise ships, not the last. You have to stop it wherever it is, but you have also to define the various kinds of anti-Semitism, otherwise you're going to make a mistake.
I know, but you know how one of the newspapers here in Westchester defined a number of incidents that they were misguided use. And I wanted to ask them, misguided by whom? Parents, the church, who misguided them that they vandalized homes? An old woman in North White Plains for Halloween, instead of just chalking it up or doing something silly, they put on her windows swastikas. Now these were done by misguided, quote-unquote, youth. Now I'd like to know where these misguided youths got their thoughts from. Peers, where did the peers get it from?
Well, you know, this whole issue
now you're
of
going
youth.
to the history of it, see?
True, but and Rabbi, when you get to youth, and you know this, I know all the work that you've done in terms of sending the right messages to the youth. We have today youth that are really troubled, and we've got crimes being perpetrated on youth, either in the domestic violence, child abuse. You see the horrible stories of the sexual abuse. You know, the drugs are routinely used now in schools, and we've got to get to the bottom of that. And this is kind of being perpetrated on kids. They're being turned on by adults in many cases who want to make money. And finally, we've got the problem, too, of even youth suicide in this county, which is not is a little bit above average, I understand. We've got to understand what's happening with the youth in our country. Are we sending them the right signals? Are the parents allowing surrogates to take their place, whether it's the TV sets or the child care centers or the babysitters? My feeling is that we've got to go back to that old-fashioned partnership of teachers and parents, that one cannot substitute for the other, and certainly the synagogues and the churches, to be sure that we send the right value signals to these kids.
Okay, that sounds real good, but let me say something. In 1958, they vandalized my synagogue in Indianapolis. In 1952, they vandalized my synagogue and my home in Lexington, Kentucky. It's not a new phenomenon.
That's right.
Now, each time they did this, when we caught the kids, we found out that it was not part of a worldwide scheme. These were kids who were troubled. So why did they pick Jews to show their trouble?
Exactly.
Well, because anti-Semitism has been abroad in the land for 2,000 years. It was something easy to reach up and grab. Why, for example, when they vandalized my temple in Lexington, Kentucky, did they make a cross on the front of the lawn out of beer cans? It was blasphemous to Christianity as well as to Judaism. Where now you see, you're not talking about these kids being part of a worldwide movement, but you're talking about a worldwide hatred of Jews, and these kids are reaching up to the shelf and grabbing a piece of it.
We're almost through with 15 minutes, and I think we are through with 15 minutes. We'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned, please. Halfway through, and you can run in 15 minutes. He has to be in New York.
Oh.
Four, three.
Recently, Farrakhan echoed Hitlerism. He has many followers, and when he had this big thing in one of the big gardens, he created, I think, among the thinking black community, more turmoil than anyone else. I'd like to know, because part of your constituency are the black community. Do you feel that the average black believes in what Mr. Farrakhan believes?
No, I don't believe they do, but I think Mr. Farrakhan is using a convenient whipping post. He senses there's an opportunity, I believe, to make a case, and he's trying to kind of give false hope to the black community by using a negative strategy, which to me is the worst kind of thing that you can do. He knows that the black people need to be encouraged. They have their own problems, and certainly we have to help our black brethren help themselves. I mean, I always feel that the best way to do it is to go back to what Maimonides said. The best way to give is not to give a man a fish, but to teach him how to fish. I think that what he's trying to do is to get a stage here. And it seems to be a convenient stage that he's picked to create a polarization, a very shocking polarization between the Jews and the others to get that stage. And I think it's terrible, and I think he should be disavowed by anyone.
Now he's talking. Louis Farrakhan, you know, is a racist. That's simple. It isn't. He's not the issue. The issue is how the black community avoids condemning him. Look, Louis Farrakhan is a racist, and Maya Kahane is a racist. The Jewish community has to shoot down Maya Kahane, and the black community is going to shoot down Farrakhan. The Jewish community, I think, to a greater extent, has done that. They've discredited Kahane up and down the line.
Tactics,
but
no question about it.
You have to condemn racism and terrorism when it appears, no matter who is doing it. The minute you start to say, well, Farrakhan has some good points, or Kahane has some good points, then you wash it away, you water it down,
exactly.
and you miss the entire opportunity. I was taping various things on my machine. You do the same thing. You know, just tape, then play it back. First segment was Maya Kahane, a racist, spouting all kinds of evil, hatred. The next part of the tape was Farrakhan doing the same thing, and the third part of the tape was the Achille Lauro. And I said, they're all related. You know, the ankle bone's attached to the leg bone.
Right.
And you've got to be able to do it.
No question about it.
I know, but he has given them hope in one way, but we can't let them do it that way.
The price is too high.
Exactly.
But what did Hitler do? The same thing. Germany was troubled. He had to take their eye off the ball, so to speak, and he then created a convenient whipping boy at that time. It's the same here. The problems of the minority groups in this country, of the poor people at disadvantage, cannot be resolved overnight. We all want to help, want to try to resolve them. But to take our eye off the real problem by creating a facade, which is what's being done here, in order to get attention, to me is just a heinous act and has to be disavowed by everybody.
Kahane introduced a bill in the Parliament of Israel for separate beaches for Jews and Arabs, all right? Another bill outlawing intermarriage. Now, the Knesset not only denounced that, they passed a law saying you cannot write racist bills in the sacred tongue. Now, we're not going to have somebody use Hebrew and translate Nuremberg laws. They cut them right off the knees.
Let me ask you something. Do you think that this trip by President Reagan going to Bitburg, could that have lent some credence to anti-Semitism? You know, everybody says forget.
I think it was a stupid thing.
Yes.
I think he goofed. I think he did not handle it properly, and I think that its effect is really nil.
You don't think that, as an end result, some of this
I don't think
that we
so.
see now is
No,
going on?
I don't believe so. I was against the visit, but when you look at it on reflection, he was poorly advised. It was kind of too far gone, and it was going to affect, apparently, our relationships with a good NATO ally, especially today strategically. And I think he felt at that point he could not do anything but try to compromise it, which I believe he tried to do when he was there.
As a matter of
I was
fact,
against
but
that
he
visit.
went to the graves of the worst.
But as a matter of fact, something very interesting did happen. The reason that Reagan was not going to go to Auschwitz, wasn't going to visit any camps, he said, I don't want to bring the Holocaust back into everyone's mind.
Sure.
What he did was precisely that.
Yes.
Exactly.
For all the
You
wrong
probably
reasons.
couldn't pay for the media that it brought for
That's
man's
right.
inhumanity to man, in terms of the
showed it.
visibility that gave the whole problems that came about with World War II, the Holocaust. My feeling is, looking back, not that you would plan it,
dramatized
we
it.
probably dramatized it better than it could have been dramatized at any other time.
I was doing a sermon, I ended up by saying, you didn't mean it, but you done good.
You've done good. You better
Yes.
believe it. Let me ask you one more. You think that the racial strife in South Africa and the plight of the homeless has any influence on this rise in anti-Semitism?
Well, racial strife in South Africa, I don't know. I think here you're talking about, again, a system that shouldn't be, an unnatural system that we have to do our best to undo. I think that we have to think of our standards of morality as worldwide. When we deal with the rest of the world, what's good for us should be good for the people that we consider to be our allies, and not that we can pierce their sovereign veil, but we have to, in dealing with them, make sure that we're projecting the same images that we believe in treating people. Human rights. Human rights should be the same standard around the world, whether it's here, Soviet Union, or South Africa, and there's something wrong when we have a major ally that has a system that is so unnatural. All right? Not that you can change it in 1 year, but we need to see some progress from the system.
You fight evil wherever it appears, but don't lay everything upon a new growth of anti-Semitism, which I simply do not see. I've seen anti-Semitism all my life. I've seen it erupt and get pushed down, and erupt and get pushed down. I think that in a troubled world, extremists have more of a voice than they would in a calmer period. We're living in the troubled waters.
Right.
But I think you have to take each act of evil by itself and confront it by itself, and not say it leads to this or that. Let's grab it where it is. Racism in South Africa is something we should attack. We have to attack it. Racial prejudice in this country. Racial prejudice you got to attack. Callousness toward the homeless in Westchester, you have to attack.
Right.
You have to stand for something in this world.
Right. And I think people of intelligence, Edith, and there are many of us, I think, that understand issues. There may be some that don't want to understand. I think realize that the Jewish people have made a tremendous contribution to this country. Just look at the values that they project, which are the very values that this country was formed on. And I could boil it down to 3 values: traditional family values, the work ethic, and fiscal responsibility. They love family. I was just at a bar mitzvah at the Beach Point Club the other day, and you need only go to a Jewish affair or an Italian affair to see the love of family, okay? The traditional values there. And without a strong family, there's not a strong society. The work ethic. They believe in working to help themselves and to then help others if they can, but they believe in the ability to access opportunity. Well, and to pick themselves up by their bootstraps, and that's important.
Before you generalize too much and give us a swelled head, you know, Joe, I think that these are values that you search for with everyone. Yes. Some people have them, some people don't. I think that the Jewish community may not be made up of angels, but they are not worthy of the hatred which they have elicited for 2,000 years.
Has Russia's lack of concern for the Jews in Russia, and that's another example, do you think that has lent? No.
No, come on.
Because that's a separate system entirely.
That's a faucet they turn on and they turn off depending upon the world diplomatic goals they have.
But there are no freedoms whatsoever. I mean, everyone's a pawn to the state, and I think it's important to understand that even there we have a role to play, and I joined with many congressmen in writing President Reagan a letter that the first issue he should raise when he sits down with Mr. Gorbachev is the issue of human rights in the Soviet Union, because Mr. Gorbachev, if we can't trust you at Helsinki, how are we going to trust you at the arms table? And basically I think it's important that Soviet Jewry is raised.
Now we're going to come down to close to the end of my program anyway. How can we start doing something to counteract what I see now, in my eyes, as potentially dangerous?
Well, I think the Rabbi gave you the answer, that we have to quickly identify the situations at hand, which in many cases are isolated, and we've got to deal with them forcefully. I don't know that we should put out a general net that might exacerbate and create other problems as well. I think we've got to identify these violations against people, the Jewish people in particular that we're talking about, and deal with them forcibly.
What can the church do?
There's a thing called principius obsta, which means resist the beginnings. When you see it, attack it, and don't wishy-wash it away by saying, well, behind it there may be something. You have to say, you do not play games with evil. You simply don't. You don't accommodate evil.
All right. What can the church do about it? And I'm so sorry, the
Well, the
Reverend Sexton is
church,
not here
let me
this
speak
evening.
for Joe Sexton of the
All
Catholic
right.
Church. The church has done enormous deeds of valor in the last 20 years. Practically every textbook in the church has been changed. The incipient anti-Semitism has been denounced. Anti-Semitism itself has been denounced. The religious anti-Semitism that I talked about earlier has been confronted and attacked by the Catholic Church more than by any other church in America. The racial anti-Semitism is not a church issue per se, and what the church has to do is condemn it wherever it appears and don't compromise away your excuses.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Now,
we share many religious values, the Judeo-Christian ethic, and I think amongst them foremost is the commandment that we should treat people the way we would have them treat us. Love thy neighbor. And I think it's important that all religions go back to those common denominators that we all share.
I read that the church is losing quite a number of their constituents to these offshoots, not so much the cults, but to not mainline religious people. And I'm wondering if that has anything to do with it.
An example?
Well, like this hate group out in the heartlands. They have left the church.
That was not a group. The hate land out in the heartland, I like that phrase, was a group of fundamentalist ministers, individual ministers who were preaching to farmers saying, the reason you're losing your farm is because of the Jews. And there was a deep-seated hatred of Jews being preached by clergymen to guys who were losing their farms, who were willing to listen, of course.
Well, we found out the real reason subsequently. We found out why they were losing their
There's
farms.
a lot of reasons. The agricultural reasons are pretty obvious once you get involved with our agricultural policies in this country.
I read an awful lot about it. Congress.
But it's interesting what the rabbi says. It's economic problems many times that breed these things, and communism always succeeds on the bellies of empty people, on the bellies, empty stomachs of people, and this is I think something we have to be mindful of.
One of the things you have to ask yourself in any of these issues is who gains? And once you ask yourself who gains, you begin to see pretty much who it is. The people who gain from anti-Semitism are not the religious people that they pretend to be.
Right.
The people who gain are the people who hate America, who want to see this country weak, who hate Israel, who want to see it destroyed. It's the haters who gain, and they're using an ancient evil for modern goals, and you attack them.
And the end should never justify the means.
Right, that's a very important
we should
statement.
always remember that. I think that's another philosophical point that we share. The great Judeo-Christian ethic is that you should never justify the means because you have an end that you want to get.
Well, I hope that something can be done to what I see happening. I don't know how we can rectify it. We can talk about, and perhaps you can talk about, and try to do something about it. I want to thank you both. I'm delighted.
Thank you
I'm
for having
honored
us.
Thank you
that
for
you're
having
here.
us, Edith.
I want to thank my viewing audience for listening in. When people of one religion are threatened, I think it threatens all of us. Thanks for watching Conversation with Edith. See you next time.